Our next speaker serves as president and CEO for Associated Luxury Hotels International. He speaks in the industry often on topics of disruption, the state of the industry, the economy, and behavioral lessons. He also holds board positions in numerous industries and was recognized by M&C Magazine's survey of top industry speakers and spoke at the South by Southwest Festival in 2018. Please welcome Mike Dominguez.
Good morning. It is great to be back with you again, and it is interesting because you are my full journey of COVID. I was here when we were shutting down the country. I remember that, I don't want to say fondly, but I remember that. And then we had the check-in in 21, and I'm here in 22, and I'll show you some data that will tell you we are done. And we are at a point that we are endemic, which is where we wanted to get to from day one. Probably the biggest announcement to tell you we're done is China is getting away from its zero COVID policy. If you did not see that, that was the announcement yesterday. What does that mean? Every country that was trying to get to zero COVID, it will never happen in the world. We will never have a day that COVID doesn't exist. And getting to an endemic stage where we can have it exist without it killing people is what we want to get to. And we're there. We are actually there where we've decoupled that. I'm going to show you some of that data. And there's a lot of good news. And we're going to have to, from a meetings and events perspective, it's going to be important for us to get rid of some of the things we think we learned as we went through this. I joke, how many of you saw with hotels, we were wiping down elevators and making sure you didn't touch anything, and we had to serve you coffee, and we realized that's not how it spreads. But that's what we knew nothing about the virus at first. So that's not a criticism, but you can fast forward and there are still people that are afraid to touch an elevator button because that is the thought process that was put into their head when it first started. That's what we're going to have to overcome over the next 6 months. But I can tell you, I just got back from Warsaw. I was in Poland last week. I was in Latin. Talk about my timing. I was in Poland, and then the Russians invade the next day. So I was with you when we shut down the country. I think it's me. There's something about it where I go. And then I was in London last week, and I will tell you, London, because the UK has been where the CDC just got to a long time ago. The CDC is now saying hospitalizations are the measurement we need to be looking at, not cases. I have been saying that for 9 months. Because that is the important part of this, that the media has focused so much on cases that it freaks us out. But to have a lot of cases without it having serious illness is not an issue. That's a really bad flu season. But it's the serious illness you're trying to focus on. And when you get to a point that that is not the issue, we're in an endemic stage. CDC is there. UK got there back in July. And why do I say that? I was in London. You would have never known there was ever a pandemic. It was like it was 2019. It was crowded, it was packed, and people were enjoying pubs, enjoying restaurants, and enjoying their lives. And no, there weren't masks, no, there weren't protocols, those are all gone. And if you did not hear the Prime Minister of the UK, he actually got rid of all protocols. Even there is no more quarantines. Even if you test positive, you go on about your life because you are in an endemic stage. The interesting thing is the UK, for 6 months, they started that in July, their hospitalizations have not moved. Neither has their deaths. Their deaths are really back to a seasonal average, and that's what you're looking for. They don't see excessive deaths. But they have been monitoring the hospitalizations, because in July, when the Prime Minister said no more protocols, their cases were literally the highest they had seen, but their hospitalizations had not moved. And that's what you were trying to get to. So we're going to talk about some of that. We're going to talk about some of the other craziness. There's a lot of other things going on. But we'll go ahead and get started. And, you know, I keep advancing this because I went from 20 to 21, and we thought 21 was going to be it. And now we go back to 22. 22 is going to look very different. January was definitely a little bumpy. But I think the rest of the year is going to feel a little bit normal. When you talk about the meetings and events industry, I've been in a lot of meetings recently. It's starting to feel much more normal. And you're seeing that. The attendance is up. We're starting to see people get out. And for anybody that'll tell you people are not going to come to your conference, I always go back to Pareto. It's the 80-20 rule. You need to start really paying attention to 80% of the people that are ready to go. And yet we listen to the 20% of the voices quite often. I am going to have the privilege of having the executive director of CES, which is the largest industry show we do, the consumer electronics show they do in Vegas every year. She's going to join us at our annual meeting coming up here in 4 weeks. And I had the conversation with her because you probably saw the headlines when Google pulled out and Microsoft pulled out of their conference, and it was in December, and this is about 2 weeks before their meeting. And the CEO walked into her office and said, "What do we do?" And she said, "We listen to the 90% of our members that are still coming and the 2,200 other companies that want to be there, not the 10% that decided they didn't want to come." And they moved forward, and they had 50,000 people in Las Vegas. And they were able to do it, and they were able to do it well for a variety of reasons. But I'm having her there to have that conversation, to say, you know, yes, you're always going to have detractors. And by the way, even coming out of this, you're going to have detractors. You're going to have some people that I don't know when they're going to think it's safe to go back to a meeting, but yet they'll go eat in a restaurant and not think twice about it. But in a controlled environment like this, it's dangerous. And that's in their mindset. And that's not judgmental. Everybody's in a different place. I was on stage yesterday, and they asked me what was my wish moving forward. I said that we all become a little less judgmental and just say, you do you. And however you need to do you, you do you. Because everybody's in a little bit of a different place, and we have to respect that. But we also have to not feel bad about we're going to move forward for those that are ready to move forward. So as we move forward, I always play a clip from Admiral McRaven. This is a different one. But Admiral McRaven, for those that don't know Admiral McRaven, he was a 26-year Navy SEAL, and Admiral McRaven, 36-year Navy SEAL. But he ran our Navy SEALs for most of the last 10 to 12 years of his career. He gave a speech in 2014 at the University of Texas, and in full transparency, hook 'em. It's the only reason I was watching it when I first saw it. It ended up being a 60 minutes recap. It ended up literally launching a book and launching a speaking career. And to me, it is hands down the best leadership speech I have ever heard. If you ever get a chance, go listen to it. It's on YouTube, and just type in Admiral McRaven, University of Texas, and I promise it'll pop up. It is a 19-minute speech that really is well worth it, because what he ended up saying, and it's very simple, the mantra at the University of Texas is what starts here will change the world. And what he ended up saying is, here are the 10 things I learned as a 36-year Navy SEAL that you need to understand if you're going to change the world. I'm going to play this one clip because I think it's kind of our lives, where we're at right now. Last year I talked about being a sugar cookie. Right now I think this is the appropriate statement.
Every day during training, you were challenged with multiple physical events: long runs, long swims, obstacle courses, hours of calisthenics, something designed to test your mettle. Every event had standards, times you had to meet. If you failed to meet those times, those standards, your name was posted on a list, and at the end of the day, those on the list were invited to a circus. A circus was 2 hours of additional calisthenics, designed to wear you down, to break your spirit, to force you to quit. No one wanted a circus. A circus meant that for that day, you didn't measure up. A circus meant more fatigue, and more fatigue meant that the following day would be more difficult, and more circuses were likely. But at some time during SEAL training, everyone made the circus list. But an interesting thing happened to those who were constantly on the list. Over time, those students who did 2 hours of extra calisthenics got stronger and stronger. The pain of the circuses built inner strength and physical resiliency. Life is filled with circuses. You will fail. You will likely fail often. It will be painful. It will be discouraging. At times, it will test you to your very core. But if you want to change the world, don't be afraid of the circuses.
And I love that message, because we're still in a bit of a circus. It's a stop and go mentality. If we have any kind of other surge, there's going to be anxiety until we know, is it like Omicron? Is it less intense? What is it going to look like? And we have to be prepared for that. Right now, there's no sign of that anywhere on the horizon, and I'll show you that as we go. But in addition to that, we have other things that are going on around the world. And I'm looking for the presentation here. There we go. Thank you. Can I get the presentation on the teleprompter? It's not showing up if I could. If not, I'll just go off of here. But confirmation bias is really important. When I look at confirmation bias, I really start to take a look at how we as human beings start to consume the news. And the interesting part of confirmation bias is we all have it. We're human beings. And confirmation bias is very simple. If you hear news or you hear something that lines up with your way of thinking or your belief system, you're going to buy it hook, line, and sinker without any research. And by the way, if you hear something that's counter to it, you're going to decline that hook, line, and sinker without any research. It's who we are as human beings. And it's an important one for us to understand and to really recognize, because if you understand what's happening around us and why I talk about this so much, I'm sorry, excuse me, if we're not gonna have the teleprompter, I just need the screen to show. No worries. I just need this rather than me as you're getting it working so I can see the screen. Thank you. So as we get to confirmation bias, I wanted to show you what's happened during COVID is very interesting. There was a Dartmouth professor that took a look at everything that was going on around the world, and you know what he noticed was the news was really negative. Now, I know we're in a pandemic, and that may sound a little bit odd, but the point he was making was when we were surging, yes, that's bad news. As we were declining, what we should have been talking about was the declines, yet the media would be talking about the areas that were still surging. And that was the point. It was always negative. So he actually took his stats class. They did an AI analysis of all media during 2020. And you know what they found when you look up on the screen? That very, very top line is mainstream media. Put any alphabet you want, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, Fox, it doesn't matter. All mainstream media, you can see, was 90% negative during COVID in reporting in 2020. Now, the purple line is your local media, your local and regional news. And you know what you found? It was about 60%, which means you got a much more balanced picture watching your local and regional news than you did mainstream media. And if you look at the blue line, and this is where I spent a lot of my time, that's international. And the international news was almost 50%. By the way, it's the same pandemic around the world. And it's being reported very differently. If you don't believe there's narratives, there's no better truth. I'm a data person, and the data is telling you there's a narrative. And if you have confirmation bias, you're buying into the narrative. Why do some people in the Northeast look very differently at the pandemic than those in South Florida? It's because of this. The narrative that's being beat into their head in their area and what they're listening to was really shaping emotions. And again, not a criticism. I try to figure out the what and the why. And by the way, when we say, is it political a little bit? There's a little dotted line that's hard to see, but you see where the lines start going down? That was the November 7th election. As soon as the election happened, the news started to get better. So if you don't believe politics plays a part in narratives, it does, because the data tells us so across the board. The interesting part is we're starting to learn this, and this is latest news traffic and what you're seeing. You see all the red? We're tuning out. As a society, we're starting to tune out. I don't know if that's good or bad. It's good if it's all really a narrative that's being driven versus journalism, but it's bad if we're not being informed. That's an important one. We're getting very, very distrusting of what we read. That means we're starting to tune into our confirmation bias. And the reason I'm so adamant about this is a little bit about psychology, but we have something called effective forecasting. And effective forecasting from a psychology discipline has nothing to do with numbers. It has everything to do with the way you look at the world. And what it means is the emotions that you've had are going to dictate how you see the future. And when you come out of a really bad time, it's hard for you to see it getting good that quickly. And when you're in a really good time, it's really hard to see it getting bad that quickly. So 2009, we all knew a correction was coming. We did not know it was that correction. We did not know it was the Great Recession because we had been on an economic tear. Coming out of COVID right now, we just don't trust it. We don't trust that we're going to be able to run. And at some point, we will. And I really do believe we're there, and I'll show you the data on why. Every forecast in our industry keeps getting revised up. You know why? Effective forecasting. They can't see it getting good. When it first started, we had a labor crunch this May, June, July. Ask any hotelier. You know why? Because everybody said nobody's going to travel. Nobody's going to get back on planes. Nobody's going to go to hotels. And guess what everybody did? They came. And they came, and we weren't ready because they came flooding back, and nobody expected it, because it had been such a dark time for so long. The interesting part is these invisible narratives live everywhere. You know the narrative that's out there right now? Everybody's going to work from home. Nobody's going back to the offices. All the data tells us the opposite. I will tell you right now, 9 to 5, 7 days, or 9 to 5, 5 days a week is gone. That will not exist anymore. There will be people coming back to the offices, and what will be determined and defined, how many days, what's the expectation, and what's going to happen around it. And if you look at this, this was the headline in March 2021. You know, working from home is here to stay, yet when you look at all the data around us, this is from the Conference Board. When you look at the Conference Board, it's the largest survey of CEOs and organizations as far as doing something that's very systematic from a statistical standpoint. And when you look at this blue, the blue is what has increased during this time frame. So what's increased? My time in meetings, work hours, employee burnouts, and employee with mental health issues. What has decreased during this time frame is in gold. What's decreased? My work-life balance, my employee morale, and my employee with high personal well-being. That is not a recipe for long-term success. That is a recipe for burnout. And you need to understand that organizations and CEOs know this. We understand what is happening. The work from home environment is not for everybody. For those of you that have a home and a backyard and you have your home office, great. For the people that we have employed that are living in a 500 square foot apartment and that have not left it and had to work from home, it's not the most healthy environment. And that's the issue. We tend to look at it through our lens, not understanding. Not everybody has the same work environment. If you have a home office, you think it's great. You don't have a home office, you're sitting on your bed in a one-bedroom apartment in New York trying to work. That's a different environment and not healthy over a long period of time. And I look at, this is the CEO of Goldman Sachs, he's called it an aberration. This work from home is an aberration. He said he is adamant that he will not have another class of MBAs come in and not work in the office and interact with the people that have done this for a long period of time. The interesting part is I was in, we have hotels in New York, and I kept telling my hotels in New York, I will come visit as soon as I'm allowed. And they said, oh, you can come, you just have to quarantine for 14 days. I said, as I said, I will come visit when I am allowed to come visit. On April 1st, they got rid of the quarantines. I was there on April 1st. And I went and visited our hotels, and you know what? New York didn't feel like New York. And when you look at cities that the energy is driven by people, it feels really down because it didn't have that energy. We saw some people, and we saw some of that starting to come back, but not much. Fast forward to June, why I'm telling you this story. Fast forward to June, I'm meeting with a hotel developer. We're down in the financial district, and the place is alive. And it feels like 2019. And I go, what happened? And right across the street, they said Goldman Sachs ordered 14,000 people back to work. And when I said ordered back to work, they made it very clear, if you're going to work for Goldman Sachs, you're coming back to work. And if you don't want to come back to work, you don't have to work for Goldman Sachs. By the way, if you're in the financial world, you want to work for Goldman Sachs. So they all showed up. And the interesting part is, he put his money where his mouth is. They invested into the street. So the street had music and food trucks and energy that he brought back to life because it wasn't going to be there naturally. And he wanted people to have a really good environment. And he started this. Morgan Stanley did the same type of announcement. JP Morgan did the same type of announcement, and it started to replicate. And the interesting part is, again, I'm a data person. I take my emotion out of it. This is a Gensler work-from-home study. It's the largest work-from-home study we've done in the US. They've done it in 2020, 2021. It did not change much. But look at the very first box. Only 12% of US workers want to work from home full-time. Back to my statement. Doesn't mean that we're not going to have some work from home options. Just means you don't want to necessarily work from home every single day, all the time. And the interesting part is, what do they miss most? People. It's not a surprise. We miss human engagement. That's why you're here. It's why yes, you could do this virtually. It's not the same. It is not the same. You miss the water cooler conversations in the office, same way you miss the hallway conversations if you're not in a face-to-face meeting. And I promise you, I know there's people saying, no, I'm gonna work from home, you guys can go work in the office. Yeah, you're gonna do that until you start suffering FOMO, until you start suffering that you've missed something because you weren't there. And you will miss something. There are conversations, there are impromptu meetings, impromptu dialogue, and I go back to Bernard Shaw. He has a great quote: the problem with communication is we all believe it happened. And that's gonna be the issue. You're gonna have everyone in the office, you're gonna announce something, and you're gonna say, I told everybody, and except the 3 people that were at home that weren't part of that little impromptu meeting, and they don't know about it, and they find out a week later. That starts to feel, and I don't know about you, when I travel for a long period of time, and I do that often, I start to get a little anxiety, like I'm missing something at home. Like there's something going on in the office, like I gotta get back, like I'm out of it. Think about that long term when everybody else is back in the office. The interesting thing is, not a surprise, collaboration, innovation, and I'm gonna show you tech companies are really insistent. This isn't just financial that has been making these statements. The interesting part is that the employees coming back are expecting to come back to a different workplace. Now, what does that mean? We spent a decade getting rid of cubicles, walls, and offices. Guess what's coming back? Cubicles, walls, and offices. They want their space back, and they want a little bit of transmission barriers, per se, because that got beat into our heads. We kind of want our space. And think about somebody who's been in their home office or their home apartment for 18 months. When you come back to the office, you're going to want your space. You're not going to want to be 3 inches from somebody all day long. It's just going to be a little bit of a different mentality. And it's interesting because that's not a surprise. I used to be able to spend some time with some large tech companies. In the HR department, they actually told us that. They had everybody working from home, and they were turning over young was 5 years or less with the company. They were turning them over at a rapid pace. And then on exit interviews, you know what they said? We came here to learn from senior leaders, and we can't learn from anybody because we work from home. We never see them. And they actually started bringing back people to the office, at least 3 or 4. That was a decade ago. So that's why I say don't buy into the narrative. We're going to go back to work. And by the way, it's not generational. The millennials aren't far off from Generation X and boomers as far as wanting to be in the office. The middle blue is wanting to be in the office at least part of the time. So this isn't an age thing, because you'll keep hearing, oh, millennials want to work from home. Yeah, some millennials. And probably those that are in some of the tech world that they could work from home. And here's the interesting part. When I said it's not just financial, Apple was getting heat because they were asking everyone to come back to the office at least 3 days a week. This doesn't surprise me. And as a company like Apple, you do not build a billion-dollar complex to have everybody work from home. You're going to bring them back to the office. The tech companies specifically know that innovation is created by bringing people together. You have to bring people together to make that happen. Google, same thing. And people kind of miss this because with Omicron, we kept pushing back the openings. But look at that. The fourth word is the most important. Mandatory return to the office. There is a mandatory return to the office in Google. I just saw he revamped his notice yesterday, the CEO. They are going to pick 3 to 4 days a week that they're expecting people to come back. And he says, as leaders, it's going to be important for them to define what work is done when. In other words, when you're in the office, this is when we're going to do team meetings, brainstorming, engagement, creative stuff. The other part, you can go catch up and do that at home. And that's going to be important as leaders. They're going to try to figure out how they're going to work when they come back to the office. But the point is, it's tech, it's financial, it's other industries. They will be back. And yet we have this narrative that keeps saying, no, we're not. And I don't know why that narrative is being pushed so hard. I don't understand that the media's infatuation with everybody's going to work from home. By the way, we had people working from home for a long period of time. It's called IBM. They started that about 20 years ago. And they had the first remote sales force. There are certain jobs you can do remotely. Not all jobs actually make sense that way. And why I say don't ignore or don't pay attention to the narrative, I love this quote by John Chambers. Deal with the world the way it is, not the way you want it to be. When I hear these narratives, I think it's the way people want it to be, instead of, no, that's not the way the world is. And it goes back to something I said earlier, the 80-20 rule. Look at the percentages about people who want to work from home. It's the 80-20 rule, but we take the 20% that want to work from home and say everybody's going to work from home. No, that's not what it's telling us. It's telling us 80% of the people didn't want to necessarily work from home. But for some reason, we focus on the 20%. We do that consistently as a society. My push to you is start to really look at the 80% rule. Start to look at the 80% and listen to that, because that's what the trend line really is. Invisible narratives. There's another one. You've heard this. Retail is dead. Brick and mortar stores are dead. We're going to do everything online. That is so wrong. That is so inaccurate across the board. And here's the data. Look at this. This green line, this is when we opened up the country. That is the increase in foot traffic in retail as soon as we let them go. And by the way, this gray line decrease is the decrease in online sales at the same time. We flatlined. Guess what? As soon as we were allowed to shop, we went to shop. And it doesn't mean we don't do things online. We all do. It's easy to do something on Amazon really quick and have it delivered next day. That's great. But that doesn't mean you're going to go buy a car that way necessarily, or you're going to go buy clothes that way necessarily. You know, I always joke, my wife orders so many shoes and all of them go back because she never tried them on. But when we go to the store, nothing gets returned because we actually tried them on and we got to see them. But everything she orders online, seriously, gets returned. Because I'm always telling her, again? And she goes, it's going back. It's going back. But this is the environment we're in. And people have sold this narrative that everything's going to be online. Here's an example. Every major retailer got back to their normal foot traffic once we opened, except for the Gap. The Gap has other issues. It has nothing to do with COVID. That has to do with the business model. But everything else, when you look at Best Buy, Walmart, Costco, Target, and you know what each one of those companies has? A really good digital presence in addition to a good retail store. And if you think everything is online, I challenge you. I'll challenge everyone in this room. Go to a Target on Saturday and tell me everybody's buying online. That is it. Or go to a Costco on Saturday and tell me everybody's buying online. Yeah, seriously. Okay, how many of you? I got show of hands. My mother goes just to sample food for a few hours. Anybody else? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to let her know that. I'm seeing her on Sunday. That'll be great. When you look at retail, every section, this is just showing you the green, every section increased. The only decrease we had was grocers. Why? Because you could go to a restaurant. Once you could go to a restaurant, we started going to a restaurant and we quit buying as many groceries. This is just such a narrative that you heard that everything is going to be online. So here's my greatest evidence, and I'll leave it here so I won't beat a dead horse. If you need no better evidence that it's not about just online, Amazon, the largest online retailer in the world, is opening up 800 physical stores. I'm going to say it again. The largest online retailer in the world is opening up 800 physical stores because we're only going to buy online. Tell me how that makes any sense. And the reason, if you have not seen them, it's called 4-Star. They are awesome stores. They're taking all the analytics from their database, and they're only carrying the best products, 4-star rated products. They're only going to carry the stuff that sells. And guess what? They're going to make more money per square foot of retail space than anybody in the industry because they're going to take their data and their analytics and they're going to blow it out of the water. It's really smart. Smaller footprints, higher sales because they have product that you will never see a clearance aisle in an Amazon 4-Star because they're only selling stuff that sells. Clearance is getting rid of the stuff that never sold. Think about that. They've changed the retail model. And this is what we've talked about. 6,000 retail stores closed during the pandemic. You know what we didn't talk about? 5,300 new stores opened. Some of the stores that closed needed to close. Some of them were holding on for dear life. And this kind of pushed it over the edge. But you have new retail coming in. You have new restaurants coming in. There's a lot of growth that we tend not to talk about. So it's kind of mistracked. Let me tell you about Omicron very quickly. And before we get to Omicron, we have to definitely talk about what's going on in Europe, because this is going to be disruptive. Regardless of how the conflict ends, regardless, when it ends, how it ends, realize that our view of the world has changed from a geopolitical situation forever. It will never go back to where it was just literally 2 weeks ago. And that's all because we have a crazy man that has literally decided to invade when that hasn't happened in Europe in quite some time. It is very disruptive. It is a little scary because people don't know where his head is. And it's a little unhinged because we always said nuclear weapons are really dangerous in the hands of a madman. We kind of have somebody that's a little erratic right now. And we don't understand what this is all about. So interesting part is this is going to disrupt not only finances. If you have not seen our industry, IMEX just announced no Russians are allowed to come. Anybody from Russia has now been boycotted. I've looked at what's going on, every sport, every industry you can name, they're cutting out Russia. And this is a penalty to say, look, if your country's doing this, and we know it's not the people, but if their country's doing that, you're not going to endorse it. And they're not going to do anything to help really drive it. I do get frustrated with the United States, though. I will tell you. I mean, yeah, we put on sanctions, but we didn't touch oil and energy, which is 60% of their exports. That's just stupid. Because if you want to hurt them, you hit oil and energy because that's where they make their money. So that's a challenge for us right now. And everybody who knows me, I'm about policy, not politics. I don't care who's in office. It's just bad policy if you really want to be impactful. But we know the impact is coming. That is the key right now is China. China, when this started, we thought was going to be Russia's ally. The interesting part is China has now really struck a tone. They don't understand what Russia's doing. And this will be interesting. Where China ends up on this will really dictate a lot. Because think about this. If China supports Russia, those sanctions are now going to lead into China. They have to, naturally. And I think that's why China's walking this fine line right now. It's an interesting one. And I personally believe when they met 6 weeks ago, that I don't think Putin said he was going to invade. He said what he told the rest of the world. We're coming in and we're stopping, and this is going to be a protection mission. And then he kept invading. Because the message has changed from China very quickly. But China's the key because even if we cut them off completely, if China decides to make up the gap, they're not going to hurt. And that to me is concerning because then we would have to react to China literally circumventing the sanctions that have been put on by the rest of the world. Right now, I think there was a bet that NATO was going to fall apart. You were going to have a division. And what has really happened, Putin has emboldened NATO. NATO has come together like we haven't probably in a couple of decades, and this is an important one. And for those that don't understand NATO, NATO was designed to protect Europe from Russia. That's why this whole fight about Ukraine joining NATO was such a big deal. That's what NATO was from day one. And the issue that we're having, and this was an issue in policy a long time ago, is Germany buys literally $5 billion worth of gas on an annual basis from the people that we're paying to protect them from. That doesn't make any sense. So there's a lot of oddity that's going on that's kind of getting washed out now. This is going to be complicated. We're all feeling it right now. The gas pricing is going up, but why does that matter to me? Airfare is going up. That's going to impact your meetings, and the number one cost to airlines outside of labor is jet fuel. So this is going to have an impact on us, not only short term, long term. And at the same time that we're having a crunch in oil supply, we've quit producing more in the United States. We've stopped fracking, we've stopped the pipeline, and again, that's not going to be a good balance. At some point, I don't know if that gives or not. It might have to, but we'll figure that out down the road. It's just too early because we're only 9 days into it, although this seems like it's been going on for 2 months already. But it's only 9 days since they've invaded. We know the markets are responding very erratically. That's important too, because that means businesses are now going to start to suffer. That'll drag on the economy a little bit. That usually drags on spending. When you're uncertain, businesses hold on to cash. And if they start holding on to cash, we don't see the investment that kind of keeps us going. So there's a lot of ripples. I'm not saying it is. These are the things we have to look at to understand what's going to come. Let's talk about COVID, and the nice thing is I'm going to run right through this. This is around the world, and you can see everybody has had their Omicron surge, and we are falling hard. And we are falling hard across the world. It doesn't matter where it is, but there are mixed messages, and this is where I'm a little frustrated. Our case count today, by the way, was as low as we've seen in 6 months. And you've heard none of that reported. When it was as high as we've ever seen, you heard it every hour on the half hour. It's as low as we've seen in 6 months, which should give everybody a lot of comfort. But here's the mixed message. We know we're on the other side of this. We know we're coming down. And yet, in the world, I just showed you, is coming down. And yet, that is the announcement from the CDC just 3 days ago. Avoid 60% of travel, even though I just showed you the world is on a downturn, completely on the downward trend around COVID. It just doesn't add up. And we wonder why people are so confused. Because you have the CDC say, don't travel. And by the way, I went to Poland and London, and they're both on the list. And I was there last week. And I didn't know that until I saw the reports. Oh, hell, I'm in 2 of the areas that I'm not supposed to be in, supposedly, when it's all said and done. It doesn't make sense, and this is what's confusing everybody. And that's a little bit of a challenge. These are all the countries that are on the list, and it's Germany, and it's London, and it's Poland, and it's the areas that are all in a major decline, and they don't have an issue yet. We're being told they're on a level 4 and you shouldn't travel there. That doesn't help us in the travel industry. It really doesn't help us with planners trying to figure out, because every planner that says we're taking an incentive trip to London, they now have people calling, but CDC says not to travel there. Why are we going there? They're still dealing with that, and we're going to be dealing with that for a little bit. I'm hoping the messaging gets better. If you did not hear yesterday, Hawaii has dropped all their vaccination requirements, finally. And that's an important one. I'm going to show you why that's really important too. So around the U.S., we're all declining. There's not an issue. But I want to take you through a little journey on how fast we went through Omicron. So this was February 4th. And anything in deep purple, red, or maroon means we have a dense concentration of cases. It means everywhere around the U.S. And I loved when I had a client that would say, well, I don't want to go to Arizona because they're having an outbreak. I go, seriously? Everywhere is having an outbreak. It doesn't matter where you are. And the interesting part is that's February 4th. That's 1 week later. You can see it's starting to lighten up in certain areas. That was as of last week, where most of the country is in a good spot, except for Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia. And this is what it looks like today. We are done. And we knew the Omicron wave had to make its way around the United States. You know what we needed? We needed Omicron. We needed a lot of people to get infected without serious illness to finally get over this. And we needed a weaker form of it as well. It's a combination, but you needed a lot of people to actually get infected to get it through, no matter what. And they're right now learning that if you had the virus and you had a vaccine, it's a super immunity you've created to your body. Having both of them, it's like, we're done. And that's the important part as we move forward. Hospitalizations, you can see, Serious hospitalizations is this deep purple. We're as low as we've seen since May. And then hospitalizations are as low as we've seen literally before any of this started back in June and July. We're in a good place all the way around the United States. And these hospitalizations, by the way, even though they were higher, they were shorter in nature. It was a respiratory infection for the first time. And everyone in this room has had a respiratory infection at some point. So they were putting fluids into people, they were giving them steroids, they were getting the inflammation down, and they were sending them home. Much shorter period of time across the board. If you are 70 and over, you are still the highest risk group, period. If you look at hospitalizations, if you look at deaths, they've come in the 70 and over population, just like any flu season, just like any viral season that's very dangerous for that audience because they have weakened immune systems. That's it. But that's exactly the audience that we still have to focus on as we continue to move forward. Daily positivity rates are way down. Everything is going in a really good direction. And then I want to show you some other outliers on Omicron. You can see these are dining stats through Open Table. And you can see like Delta, we came down a little bit. Omicron, we came down a lot. Omicron was like everybody freaked out because the numbers were so big. And then you could tell it was short-lived and we started to move again. And it was across the board. That's restaurants. This is air. You can see airline came down. People stopped traveling in January, but it came roaring back. I promise you, I've been traveling for the last 12 days, and every plane has every seat taken. And it's the first time in 2 years where I'm getting the notices from the airline, give you $150 if you can take a little later flight before I get on. So we're in a really dense situation and in a good way. This is probably the positive for all of us. We've had more savings during this time frame than any point in history. We've had almost $3 trillion in savings on a global or on a U.S. global scale, as far as all of us pulled together. You know why? Most of it was government driven. Most of it was stimulus and or incentives that were driven to us. And at the same time, we weren't spending because many areas of the country were locked down. So you weren't spending and you got a lot of extra money. Guess what? It's being saved and now it's being spent. It's actually part of the issue we've had with people coming back to work. The savings are so high, they can afford not to come back to work immediately. They have a little bit of time. I saw he used to be an economic advisor for President Obama, and he actually made the comment. He said, you can't spend your savings forever. He expected by the middle of next year, or middle of this year, that we would start to see that really start to flood because the savings will continue to dwindle. And by the way, that's not just a US trend. The UK alone has an extra $1 trillion in savings that they'll spend. It's really good for us because you know what they spend it on? Travel. Travel really is where this extra discretionary spend goes. That's a good thing for our industry overall. And then participation rate. Look, workforce is coming back. We had this major drop in workforce. There's a lot of things to it, and I'm going to talk to it at the end of this. I always say don't overthink. We've all talked about virtual and hybrid and what that looks like. And guys, virtual and hybrid have been around for a decade. We're just catching up. It just became mainstream. And the interesting part is when this started, we were probably in the early adopters right here. We're probably right now in the early majority, late majority, as far as adoption of the new technology. I worked in Vegas. I promise you, some of the largest tech companies in the world have been doing some really vibrant hybrid conferences for over a decade. And it's just now become mainstream. It's become affordable in many situations, and you have a lot more choices. So if there was anything good about this, it fast-tracked the adoption process. I read an article that said the technology adoption curve literally fast-forwarded by 7 years. 7 years within a 2-year window. We got 7 years of adoption, and that's really good because now you're here and we get to advance from that point. It's going to move us very quickly. Nobody had a greater comeback than the QR code. Promise you. The QR code is back. Everybody knows it. We had forgotten about those things, and everybody uses it today. And I love when people go, you use QR codes now. We've had them. You just never wanted to use them. And I love when it's like, your hotels, you have mobile check-in. We've had it. You've never wanted to use it. And the interesting thing, and the good part of this, is it forced people into the behavior. My mother is comfortable with a QR code in a restaurant today. That's fun for me to see. Like, she knows what to do with it. She doesn't feel like she's going to look stupid not knowing what it is. And that's the reason she didn't want to use it before. But now she doesn't feel that anymore. That's a real positive for us as we move forward. Long-term, short-term, I want you to think about this. Everything you're thinking about right now, think about between now and June. Still going to be a little clunky coming out of this. I think by June it normalizes. I really do. I think by the time we get to June, you're going to see some real normalization in behavior and society and how we start to move. The reason London felt the way it did was because they've been in that experience for 6 months. When we've been in that experience for 6 months, people are going to forget about COVID. And I don't want to say that from the human casualty standpoint. I'm talking about a behavior and perception of moving forward. Because it's always hard to have that discussion because we did lose life during this time frame, and we understand that. We're talking about the business side of this as we start to move forward. Remember, the world got really small. So everything you know, and I actually named this as you've seen, you need to be decisively indecisive right now. Do not make definitives on what's changed forever. If I hear one more person say that, I swear I'm going to lose my mind. Because everybody's like, this is what, stop it. We don't know what's changed forever. We don't. There's a lot of guessing, and I do think the world needs to normalize, and I think most of it is going to look pretty normal when it's all said and done. The world got really small. What do I mean by that? You couldn't travel to a lot of places. Now that you can travel a lot of places, guess what we're going to do? Travel to a lot of places. We're going to start moving. That's going to change the dynamics. You know, leisure traffic in the United States is at all-time records. Why? Because we couldn't go anywhere. But as we start traveling away, guess what starts coming in? All the international traffic that couldn't get here. So it's going to offset itself, but realize the world got really, really tiny. It got very regional in nature. And we're going to start to open up again, and it's going to start to be more global. And I promise you, coming from Europe, there's some pent-up demand because people just want to visit the U.S. They haven't been able to be here in 2 years. They're ready to come, and that's going to be good for all of us. What has not changed is experience still matters. We're at a time when it comes to meetings particularly that we spent 2 years trying to figure out how to meet. We need to now remember why we're meeting. Why are we coming together? What is the thought process about engagement and literally interaction and mental acuity? How do we bring all that to life? And again, not a criticism. For 2 years, we had to figure out how we were going to meet. We're no longer thinking about that. We're now thinking about why are we meeting and what's the experience look like? And that's going to be an important piece of the puzzle. Everything impacts our world for sure, as far as the hospitality industry. You've heard about the labor conversation. The narrative is overplayed as well. There is not a great resignation in the United States. There's a great reshuffle. And LinkedIn has done a really great analysis on this, by the way, and I'm going to show you some of it. But specifically in the U.S., there's some things we're not talking about. We're complex when it comes to labor. The latest report from AHLA shows we're about 200,000 jobs short of where we were in 2019 in the United States from the hotel perspective. We're about 100,000 jobs short just from J1 and H-2B visas that we normally have. Half of that loss right now is from the overseas audience that we usually have as a temporary seasonal workforce that we always expect. We never have enough staff to ramp up for the summertime in the beach areas and then the ski season in the winter resorts. And that is a seasonal audience. By the way, we missed 100,000 J1 visa applicants in 2021 and 2020. We also lost H-2B visas to the tune of about 50,000 that we expect. We have a lot of H-2B visas that come to work with us seasonally. J1's mainly the students that come to work with us, but actually the H-2B are people that come in seasonally to come work and do these jobs. You'll go to resorts in Miami, for instance, you'll see a lot of Jamaicans. Jamaica's one of the biggest providers of seasonal workforce for us. And when you see that, those contingencies, it's because they're here during a seasonal pattern. The other part is the boomers are retiring. I used to always joke, the boomers were the audience that was never going to retire. They're finally retiring. And that's not a bad thing or a good thing, but it's an audience, and now you've moved up a lot of people, and that's where the gap is. We have a gap because we do have a great retirement with an audience that literally you would have thought started to retire 5-6 years ago, and they're all kind of retiring at once. So it's all coming to a head. School closures we don't talk about enough, but every state, every city that never opened up their schools became a problem. Everybody with universities that went to remote learning became a problem. Guess who works in hotels? College students. Why? Because we're open 24/7. We can work around all hours. It really works well for our college students, and they all went home, so they didn't have to work. And then by schools not opening, we have a daycare issue. We're short 100,000 daycare workers in the United States. And if our housekeepers and our bell staff and our front desk staff don't have a place to put their kids, they're not coming back to work. That's an issue. And the issue is these states that stayed closed for so long, it's going to take 6 to 9 months to get that leveled out. That's why there's this we're kind of in that in-between. That's why I played the circus video. We're still going to be in a little bit of a circus for just a little bit until we get this out. But I do think it smooths out before the end of the year. We also have people making life choices. A lot of people said, I want to move closer to family. And we had people move for a variety of reasons. And then we had the Amazon effect in most states. And what does that mean? Everywhere Amazon opens up a distribution center, you're now competing for the labor that used to work in the service industry. Because we have a lot of people say, I can go pack a box, make good money, and nobody's yelling at me. The hardest job in the world, I always say, is working at the front desk. Because people are not really kind if you're giving them any kind of news that they don't want to hear. So that is a challenge when you're looking at our industry that we have to kind of figure out. But I love, if you don't follow Guy Berger, you should. He follows a lot of economic conditions. But he talks about the Great Resignation is really misleading. And this is why he says that, is even though we've had a lot of quits, what people tend to miss on this chart, the blue is hires during this time frame, and the orange are quits during this time frame. We've hired more jobs than have actually quit, but the only thing that gets reported on are the quits. And that's kind of the point. When we say it's the Great Reshuffle, that's why that would be a better representation than the Great Resignation. And this is an important one because it's consistent. We opened up 5.3 million new businesses during 20 and 21. New companies that didn't exist before the pandemic. That's a lot of jobs. It's a lot of jobs that need to be filled where we already are short on jobs to begin, or people to fill those jobs to begin with. That's kind of this crunch, and that's why I say it's complex, but yet the narrative seems so simple. We just think people are just quitting everywhere. That's not quite the case. They're quitting, they're moving to family, they're moving to other jobs, they're doing things they've always wanted to do in their life. And if anything happened during the pandemic, it gave us time to reflect when it was all said and done. This is the H-2B visa, so I'm not going to talk about that anymore. One thing I wanted to really wrap up on is what's happening in our industry. The forecasts continue to get stronger. For everyone in this room, this is probably the most important. If you look right here, our average rate is back to 2019. So anybody thinking there's going to be huge discounts in the hotel from where you were in 2019 and what you were paying in 2019, that's not the case. And by the way, it's higher than 2019 in the group segment. It's not lower. So you need to understand that 2020 and 21 does not matter from a business perspective. It never happened. This is like 2020 coming off of 2019. And if you remember, 2019 was the best year we had seen in our industry. And 2020, we were all expecting those rates to continue to climb. It's kind of where we are. Not trying to depress anyone, trying to make you understand that is the world we're living in. Because you'll read the media and you think hotels are just desperate. Not the case. Hotels have actually been more profitable, the ones that have been open during this time frame, because they have a leisure audience paying rates that they've never seen before. And they're not taking that business midweek. They don't have as much labor. They're actually more profitable because all our profit comes from rate. And that's something we don't share enough. All the hotel's profit comes from rate. Average rate is where the profit is when it's all said and done. Food and beverage, it's a challenge. Food and beverage, we make about 30 to 35 cents on every dollar we bring in. Food and rooms, we bring in 75 to 80 cents. 75 cents to 80 cents of every dollar we bring in goes to profit. And that's a little misleading, by the way, because that doesn't mean it's pure profit. You still got to pay mortgage, you still got to pay debt, you got to pay insurance, you got to pay all that stuff. But just in running the operation, that's where the profit comes from. That's the important part. And then when I talk about inflation, all food prices going up, everything. And there's always this disconnect for some reason that your grocery bill is getting more expensive and you believe a hotel's is getting cheaper. That's the disconnect. That is just the truth, everybody. You've got to have conversations with your hotels. But when I had, yesterday I was on a panel at the MIC, and I had somebody raise their hand, and they said, you know, when I'm asking for a 10% discount, is that not a good idea in this environment? And I said, that was never a good idea, period. And I mean that sincerely, because the important part with food and beverage is to have conversations with your hotels and to figure out exactly what food is actually costing for certain items. And when I say discounting is never good, anyone asking for a 10% discount, they've never worked F&B. Because if you've ever worked food and beverage, you start with a menu card and you build up to a price point you need to run the operation at the profit margin you need. And the interesting part is now, if we've done all that work and you're asking for a 10% discount, I will tell you, you're sacrificing something and you're not getting what you were thinking you were getting. So what do I mean by that? Every banquet menu in the world says filet. It never says grade, ounce, or cut of meat, does it? Because the type of meat they buy is going to be very much dictated by what you decided to pay for. And it's the difference of you going to a banquet event and it felt like you were in a five-star restaurant, and you going to a banquet event and you're chewing the meat a day later. You know, it's that kind of experience. And anyone who's watched the Food Network, it all starts with product. The product. If you start with good product, you'll have good food. Just talk to your hotels. But the discounting is really an issue. Because again, you're asking them to discount after they've priced it at a point they need to be. And you're going to sacrifice something. When you have chef's choice of vegetables, you get squash. You don't get asparagus, because asparagus is very expensive. You don't buy asparagus every day, because it's very expensive. But chef's choice, squash, it's really cheap. And that can go on the plate very quickly. Again, talk to your hotels, figure out what is and what isn't. And I'm just gonna run through this quickly. Chicken shortage, we don't even talk about it, because everybody says, I'll have chicken, it's cheaper. No, it's not today. Not when you look at the margins. And when you look at these prices, I'm the geek that actually looks at this stuff. So if you look at this is poultry. This is what's happened to chicken. We've increased by 28% literally since December 2020. This is hog pricing, so this is bacon. I hope you enjoyed your bacon and sausage today. It's up 38% since December. It's high in margin as far as increase. Coffee is at a 6-year high. And Starbucks, if you did not hear their earnings call, Starbucks has increased your coffee price by 20% in the last 18 months, and you keep paying for it without even barking. But we raise our breakfast up a quarter, and we've created literally a deadly sin. That's the issue. And there's this disconnect on what you do in your personal life and when you come into a hotel. You're paying 20% more for that cup of coffee at Starbucks, and you're willing to do it. McDonald's on their earnings call, they've raised prices 7% during this year, and yet we're still buying McDonald's. That's the issue, and realize you heard me say it's a disconnect from what you do in your regular life and what we do in the hotels when it's all said and done. And that's coffee. It just continues to go up. And that has nothing to do with COVID. It has to do with droughts in Brazil. It has to do with floods in South Korea. There are other reasons that things actually happen. And then I will tell you, not everything's increasing. Salmon is actually down, and it's healthy for you, so have more salmon. That's good. That's a much better menu choice right now. You need your omega-3. And then you look at shrimp. Shrimp is only up 9%. So seafood is a little bit less. Yes, we have shellfish allergies, I understand that, but salmon you could do, and salmon is farm raised, so it's a little bit cheaper for us. And then right now we have corn that's increasing, wheat is at an all-time high, oats are at an all-time high. Why does corn matter? Because we feed all our produce, or all our meats, corn. Corn fed is what everybody wants to see. And by corn, us feeding corn and using it for fuel, it's really increased pricing, which means it's going to make you pay more when it's all said and done. I'm going to leave you with this quote with one of my favorite philosophers, and it's Denzel Washington, and I say that seriously. He is a really, really bright individual and a very faith-based man, by the way. But I love this comment: never confuse movement with progress, because you can run in place and not get anywhere. We've been running in place for about 2 years. And that doesn't mean you're not busy, but where are you headed? Where are you running to? And you need to really think about that as we start to move forward. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be with you guys, and we'll see you through the rest of the conference.